All right, so we have about an hour and a half now. If it takes the whole time, great. If it doesn't, that's fine. We really meant for this to be a time for all of you to get a sense of how this community review will go and for us to go over some key parts of this. Just to give you guys kind of a reminder on the big picture, the people have actually, I have slides for this. I'm actually just going to go ahead and share my screen. That way you can see the slides rather than me just talking. These are all the slides that were sent to you all by Angela last week. These are also for those of you that might have watched the video that we had already recorded. Almost the same slides. I corrected one thing that Jerry sent out overnight that I had meant to and never ended up correcting him. So he caught what I forgot. So what we're going to do here today is three things. The first is we're going to review the research proposal evaluation process, just to give you guys a sense of where this is going to go and what this is going to look like. The second is we're going to review some of the grant application materials, just to make you familiar with these in case you haven't seen this before. I know Jerry has seen this before in his previous roles, but in case you haven't, it'll make you familiar with this. And then we'll talk about the scoring rubric we're going to use and the process around this. And the goal that we had with the scoring rubric was really to make it fairly simple, but at the same point, get at the key things that all of you had mentioned and the rest of the people had mentioned at the consensus conference that we wanted to make sure we captured. Any questions before I get started? Okay. At any point, if there's a question or a comment or something's confusing, just interrupt and stop me. I'm going to, at the end of pretty much every slide, pause and see if there are any questions or anything's confusing, but please just jump in if anything happens. All right, I don't think I need to remind all of you why we're here around doing GEAR 2.0, Advancing Dementia Care. Our aim has very much been consistent to improve the emergency care of people living with dementia and other cognitive impairments. Focusing on the 4 areas that were identified and that we talked about during the consensus conference and previously: the emergency department practices, detection, ED care transitions, and communication and decision making. What you may or may not remember is that after we finished the consensus conference process and the papers that resulted from it, the goal and our plan is that we have pilot grants that we're giving out using money both from NIH and some foundations. These pilot grants have a 2-part review process. One part is the scientific review, which we want to do to ensure sound scientific practices. But the second part, and to us in many ways, the part that ensures the goal of the pilot grants, is the community review process to ensure sound research engagement. And that's what we're really focusing on here. That's the piece that you all are involved in. So to take a step back and just talk about this from the big picture, the way the pilot grant review process is going is a scientific review is occurring through the Emergency Medicine Foundation and their scientific review section. That follows the typical NIH format and will result in a score for each grant. Well, I sit on the committee, and there's a geriatrician dementia expert that's been brought in to help with the reviews, and then EULA will be there also. And this is supported by the Emergency Medicine Foundation, which is actually funding part of these grants also.
Manish, are you clicking the slides forward?
I am. Did it freeze?
Yeah, on my end, and this may just be mine. It just says
No,
the
it
GEAR
does
2.0.
sometimes. Let me restart it.
Okay.
thank you for pointing out that it was not advancing. Sometimes it does that.
Yeah.
Jerry, did you have something you were going to say?
No, I was just going to let Angela know that she was right. It wasn't advancing for me either, but I see it now.
Okay, yeah, if it does that again, let me know every now and then. And I need to figure out what the rule is. I think if you stay long enough, it freezes or something. The second part is the community review that you all are going to do. We had put out notice to the task force community members, as well as the Health Equity Advisory Board. If folks were interested in doing it, participating in the community review, we had tremendous interest. We ended up going with a subgroup just to not burden too many folks at the same time, to have a good cross section of care partners, people living with dementia, advocates, etc. And this review will occur and we'll get a score from the grants. And then the funding decision will be based on the scoring and confirmed by our executive committee. For this year, this is going to be a fairly simple process, which we'll talk about when we actually go through the review. In the future years, we may have to figure out how to tweak this, but this year I'm not too worried about how this process is going to work. There's one thing that I have to mention, and I don't think it's going to be an issue here, is about conflicts of interest. This is a big issue for us because we want to make sure that these grants are being reviewed without any conflicts of interest. And so if you have a family member, a professional connection, or financial connection that's applied for the grant, you can't review it. To my knowledge, no one here does, so it's not really an issue. If it is, please let us know later. Any questions at this part, or at this point? Or any comments?
I have a question about the conflict of interest in my particular case, since I worked at the University of Pennsylvania and have recently retired, but still have connections. And even though they're not paying me, I'm still working with them in some ways. So I know with federal agencies, any grant that I reviewed, any grant that was being reviewed by Penn, I would be recused from, just because it was from my institution. So if that were the case, I just need to know whether that would be the case for me if a grant came from anybody at Penn. And I could be recused. It's not that I would necessarily know the person, but just because I came from Penn.
Yeah.
So,
I hear you on that, Jerry. I'm not worried because if I remember correctly, we actually don't have any grants from Penn this time around. And given you have retired from there, I would pretty much take it as, unless you are directly somehow involved with the people on the application, I wouldn't worry about that.
Thank you.
No, thank you for being transparent. Okay, I'm going to move forward, seeing no comments. And it looks like the screen sharing is still working. So what I'm going to do now is go through the grant application materials. Before I jump into this, I just have a question for the group. How many of you have participated in some type of grant review before, for whether it's for Alzheimer's Association or as part of a local institution or another foundation? Deb, you have, Jerry, Morgan. Okay, that's good. It's about where I assumed it would be. I assumed Morgan and Jerry had, and Deb, you having done it's extra credit. So for the grant applications, one thing that we had committed to, and I believe it was Michael that had brought this up during a task force meeting a while back, is that we're going to provide really the entire grant for all of you. The left column we feel is absolutely necessary for review for you guys to do a good job. The middle column, you could debate, but we're going to provide both the resources and environment and the letters of support for you to read. The letters of support particularly important because we wanted these groups to be engaged with the community, and it's important for you to see the level of the community engagement with the applications. The piece that we're willing to provide if you really want it, but at this point don't necessarily feel like you need it, is really the budget justification, that they provide, and then what's called the other forms of support. The budget justification is getting reviewed by administrative folks as well as on the scientific side. We're happy to provide it if you'd like it. Do any of you feel strongly one way or the other? Would you like to see the budget?
Not me.
Not me.
I wouldn't look at it unless you needed me to.
I'm seeing lots of no's. Okay, then I'm happy to follow that general guidance. The other forms of support document is merely a document that's provided by the people participating on the grants to show what other grants they have so that we can review it administratively and make sure that they have time to do this. That's something that Ange and Jeff can take care of. And so I don't think it's something you all need. And so we'll just skip that for you. So these are all the pieces you get. And we're going to go through these pieces now, just so that you can all know what you're going to see. So the first page is the cover page, and this is pretty straightforward. It's, and oh, by the way, I'm including stuff from one of the grants that has been submitted. I probably should tell Cameron that I did this, but you guys are all going to be reading this anyway, so I figured there's nothing top secret here. Although, Ange, I just realized that the version that we have up, we should probably lock it down because it has this in it, and we don't want everyone to see his parts of his grant.
Like on the YouTube, like the YouTube
Yeah.
video.
Yeah.
Make a note. I'm gonna do that.
So the cover page lists the individual, their title, their institution, the grant category you could ignore because you're only going to see stuff as part of this grant, the project title, how much money they're requesting. The money requesting, we said they could request up to $90,000, and everyone pretty much requested $90,000.
Yeah.
This is what's there. It's nothing terribly extensive, but it does give interesting and important information that you would want to know as you're preparing to look at the grant. The next piece is the scientific abstract. And this is really a short technical description of the project and tells you in a very short summary why they're doing it, what they're going to do, what they think they'll find, and what their methods are. This is usually about a half page long and gives you a very high level overview of the entire proposal. Any questions about the scientific abstract? The layperson summary is something that's not usually in NIH grants, but something that we actually requested from all of our applicants. And this is a short, non-technical description that's written so anyone, regardless of their background, can actually understand the study. And the reason we felt this was important was a couple-fold. The first is, obviously, we have community reviewers here, that we wanted them to have both the technical and a non-technical description. The other reason is we're going to, whichever grant we fund, we're going to post this layperson summary because we want anyone in the community to be able to read this and get a clear understanding of what has been done. And so this was our way of getting them to write that. The specific aims is usually up to 1 page. And it's really the goals and expected outcomes of the project. There's usually a little bit of background that gets tied in here, maybe a little bit about innovation, but it is in under a page, and they go through, and Ange actually cut and spliced it here. They go through and say what they're going to do, and then they'll have 1 to 3 aims where they say exactly what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and what their hypothesis is. The aims page can vary between applicants in terms of what it'll look like, but you should, at the end of reading this, have a pretty good sense of the goals and outcomes of the proposed project. The research proposal is really the meat of the grant that you're going to see. And I think of it in 3 components. The first component is the significance. Why is this important? Dr. Gettle here structured it very explicitly. significance, importance of the problem to be addressed. He gave it those headings, and then that paragraph that follows will probably cover that topic. And you'll see that when you get his whole grant. The second section is the innovation section. And in that section, it's really what's new about this application. And what's new can really be a couple of different things. And ultimately, it's up to you to decide, is this new? But it could be the applicant comes up with something completely outside the box, never been done before, never been thought of before, and it's innovative that way. The other way it could be innovative is that it takes something that's been proven in a different context and then applies it to people living with dementia and their care partners. Whether it's some sort of support program, whether it's some sort of intervention, whatever it might be, but that could be innovative too. So it's really for you all to decide as you're reading this, do you agree that why they say it's innovative, you agree that that's also innovative? And then the third section is the approach, which is this will be the nitty gritty on how they're going to accomplish the aims. What are they going to do? Sometimes they'll have a little bit of information about preliminary work they've done, i.e. maybe they've enrolled a few folks or they have a track record of doing dementia-related research. But then it's going to be into nitty-gritty details of we're going to enroll 10 people in this study. They have to have, a score of such and such on some sort of dementia screening test so that we can get the level of severity of dementia we want. They need to live in the community or live in a nursing home, whatever the case might be. They should basically give you a good sense of how they're going to accomplish the aims such that you feel comfortable that they can do what they say they're going to do. Any questions or comments so far? Hearing none, I will continue. We've asked all of the applicants to actually put in a personal statement as well, because we want to understand why are they interested in the topic, what are they going to do, and is there something that drives them in terms of that they want you all to consider while you're evaluating the grant. So Dr. Gettle here talks about, his interest is about advancing emergency department care transitions in the geriatric population. He talks about, and it's truncated here, but the long-term objective of his work will help you get a sense of, is the person real? Is this where they're going, or did they just add for people living with dementia at the end of every sentence to try to apply for this grant when they don't really care about it? In the next section, something called the role of participants. And this is really where they have to describe who all is going to be their team members, what they're going to do, and how they'll work together as a whole. Whoops, I do not know how that happened. There we go. This where you'll see, does the team have the expertise they need? Do they have an advisor in the form of individual living with dementia? Do they have someone that has expertise as a geriatrician or a neurologist with dementia expertise, or a neuropsychologist or something for the application? Do they have the sufficient emergency medicine expertise for the grant? This is where you'll be able to see who these people are and how they'll work together and who's going to be responsible. You can also get a sense of this from something called the biographical sketches. This is a document that's actually defined by the NIH. So it looks a little screwy for people that haven't looked at this before, but it's what the NIH has fill out at least my entire career. And what you'll see on this is their research and training that exists. So for Dr. Gettle, you can see he went to Elizabethtown College, then went to Penn State, then Brown, and then went to Yale. Later on, it talks about awards he's had, and it talks about research that he's done. There is a personal statement as part of this. It may look a lot like the personal statement that we just finished talking about, but it may also be different and much more technically written. There is a section called Resources and Environment, and this is basically supposed to describe the available resources for the researchers, whether it's a lab they need, equipment they need, expertise they need. Here, Dr. Gill talks about the Yale Pepper Center, which is within their program on aging, as a resource that can help him. Sometimes people make this like a 20-page document and list every single thing at their institution, which is terribly unhelpful. But hopefully this will highlight the items that will actually directly apply to this application. Any questions or comments? No? Okay.
Let me ask a question.
Sure.
So where would we expect to see a description in this project, for example, of the Empowering Partners Network? And one of the slides that you showed, this network was mentioned. It sounds like it is that entity or that organization is an important part of the project. Would that show up here under Resources of Environment, or would it come up under the letters of support, or where would we learn more about that network?
So when you're saying the network, are you saying with the gear network or with?
No. In the abstract, the specific aims on that slide, the investigators talked about their approach and what they're going to do. And they referred to a network that's called an Empowering Partners Network. That was the name of the network.
Okay.
Maybe it was on a slide prior to this one. But I would just want to know, here it is.
Yeah.
So they have a partnership with members of the Empowering Partners Network. That sounds like an entity that we need to know about. And I'm just curious, where would that come up in this grant proposal?
Even though I've read all the proposals, I don't remember exactly where they brought it up. I would expect to see that in the letters of support and potentially in where these resources and environment section. If I remember right, the Empowering Partners Network is from a community organization, which is why I would expect to more see that in the letters of support. But I think the question you're asking is the important one, which is if somebody talks about a group they're going to work with, then there should be something from that group saying, yes, we're participating and here's what we're going to do. And here's why we can do that. That, you know, the Empowering Partners Network isn't like someone in their basement that just put it together last week. It's
Right.
They've got a track record.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? That was a great one, Jerry. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Which goes into the letters of support. Was the next section we're going to talk about. This is a statement from others that in some cases will validate the applicant's abilities. In a lot of cases will really reflect their commitment to participate. So in this case, this is Heidi Gill and Live Well putting a letter committing to participate with Dr. Gettle and getting into details on terms of what they're going to do. So in many ways, just kind of my editorial comment, for me, the letters of support are really important because it tells me how well they've truly engaged, or does it just sound like, you know, a kind of rubber stamp, okay, yeah, we're here.
Anish, I think that Jerry brought up a very good point in regards to entities. So an individual that's not familiar with Live Well, is there a biography, a biopic of Live Well that can tie into the entire grant review?
Yeah, so there should be, whether it's within the letter, sometimes people put it in the letter, or whether it's within the actual like grant proposals, such as in the facilities and resources section, there should be a summary of these organizations. And this will be one of the things we can talk about when we actually meet to discuss the grant, because if, and I don't remember right now, it's been probably a month since I read the grant, or at least a couple of weeks. But, you know, I have never done anything with Live Well until Gear came to be. And so I don't know how big or how extensive they are. And if it's not there, then that's a legitimate thing for us to discuss when we discuss the review of saying, hey, you know, there's this group Live Well they're working with, but it doesn't sound like, you know, it's not clear how established they are. Or similarly, Dr. Gettle, it's not clear how established he is. And some of the stuff that I would definitely want you all to pull out and identify as issues.
Also, see, I think one of the reasons we would like to see letters of support from those entities is because it will help us understand the duration and strength of the relationship that the academic investigators have with these entities. Do they have, particularly if you're talking about community-based organizations, do they have a relationship that makes the project feasible? Or are they going to have to create a relationship before they can really effectively conduct the project? So it's one thing for them to write about those entities within the resources and environment, which they should, but the letters of support coming from those organizations verify how they see their own roles. And it would be important for me to see those letters if the entities have an important role in the project.
Agreed. And that's why we will ensure that they are there for you all to review.
Manish, Beverly, do each of the letters of support include website addresses? If so, if you wanted to know more than just what's in the summary, and also to confirm having their support is valid, is there at least a website for them so that we can go and get more information?
You know, it's one of those things where I hope they include that. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Similarly, you could just as well Google the organization and look it up if you so desire to check it. I know, you know, when I do grant reviews, that's something that I do, and I did that, given that I'm actually on the scientific review side for all of these. I've done that for the organizations I don't know.
Yeah, which to me, it would seem that the very minimum, if you're getting support from somebody, you would make it easy. You would not want them to have to Google it. You know, it's an extra service to provide. Just put it in there.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Unfortunately, not everyone does that, but I
Okay.
agree 100%.
Okay, thanks.
Other comments or questions? These have all been great. All right. The other piece that all these grants have to have is an ethics section. And there's two components to this, is the way I kind of think about it. The first is that we wanted them to outline to us the risks and benefits associated with the proposed project. This gives you all a chance, and the scientific reviewers will spend a lot of time behind this, to make sure that the project is not, I don't want to say illegal, but it doesn't take advantage of populations that are vulnerable. We want to make sure they've thought it through. Now, the other piece for all of you to know is whichever grant gets funded will have to go through their own institution's IRB process. It's called the Institutional Review Board. And so they will have to go through their institution to have a formal review from a regulatory and ethics component before they could even get started. So there will be a second level of review that occurs. But we always want to see that they've thought about it, that they highlight the risks and potential benefits of the project and how they're going to address it. And so, you know, one example, which is not going to be here, but I'll give an example that just for giggles, is that if you ever have an employee that you want to participate in research, they're a vulnerable subject by definition, because I'm their boss and I can force them to do something that may not be something they want to do. And so it's not that you can never have employees do research, but you can. There just has to be special structures and protections to protect the employee. So similarly, if a person living with dementia is wanting to be enrolled, or the researcher wants to enroll a person living with dementia during an emergency department visit into the research study, they would have to make sure that there's protections, things like getting informed consent, things like making sure that whoever provides the consent has decisional capacity, other things like that, because we do not want to exploit the subjects in any way. This is an important piece that all of you will have the opportunity to look at and think about.
Manish, this is just a question outside, but is there just one grant that's going to be available?
We're going to give out up to 4 grants. We don't have to give 4 grants. And then when we go off recording, I'll talk a little bit about them. I just don't want to get into a lot of details about the number of grants and things like that while this is being recorded. But there are up to 4 that are going to be given out.
I have a comment about this risk benefit human protection section. One of the issues in working with community organizations is that the informed consent statement is often highly technical and kind of written in legalese. The institutions mandate that, even though they can be difficult for the participants to understand. So they kind of have to be translated. I'm curious whether in these proposals they probably weren't asked to submit their informed consent documents. So they're just going to be talking about risk benefits and how they're going to protect the participants.
Exactly. And part of the reason we did not ask for it is the informed consent documents, at least my experience, has been very institution to institution, and we did not want to.
Sure.
We're not going to have, we don't have regulatory authority over what their institution will require. And we didn't want to make people who weren't going to get funded necessarily to have to do extra work.
Sure.
The nice thing is, though, and I should add this piece here, is that the grant awardees, the people that get the grant, are going to have a lot of support from the GEAR network, from the standpoint of doing the research, working with people living with dementia, being a resource in terms of how to recruit individuals into research studies, et cetera. And so there's going to be a fair amount of support available from all the people you met during the consensus conferences and stuff like that. And so we're going to do everything we can to make sure the people that get the funding are able to be successful and go on to future grants. Michael?
Yeah, I got a question here, and I don't know if you already covered it, but I think it would be interesting to know for the people who are applying for these grants, if they have done other things related to dementia, and what are those particular things they have done.
I agree. And that is why we have the personal statement and why they will have their bio sketch. In both of those places, they should have talked about what they have done in the past to do research on emergency care of people living with dementia and their care partners. So 2 different places where they have opportunities to highlight that.
You know, Michael, the other place where that comes up, which was shown in one of the slides that we've already been seeing, is under the approach section in the research. And there, investigators commonly talk about their past experience relevant to the project that they're applying for. In this case, you would expect that person to talk about prior research in dementia, prior research with artificial intelligence or whatever. So there are 2 or 3 places where they have to tell us that they have some kind of experience in having done this. Or they may have none, and so that just becomes part of the rating process.
Good point, Jerry. Thanks for highlighting it. And yes, Dr. Gettle here talks about what he's done in the past. And he says, like, my published work has evaluated ED care transitions as well as qualitative analyses. Other questions or comments?
From a layperson standpoint, I'm extremely appreciative of the extra effort and intentionality of putting the grant process together that says, okay, you need to explain this so people who are not in the industry understand what you're doing. Because I've participated and still can participate in a lot of studies around dementia, and the consent form, somebody has to interpret it for me before I can sign it, because the terminology is just out there for me. So I really do appreciate the intentionality that has been put forth in gathering the information so lay people can understand it.
Thank you for the comment, and to build upon that after this round is over, because we're going to have a few more years of this, we're going to want to know what worked well and what didn't work well so that we can tweak this for the next round. All right, I'm going to move forward into our last piece to talk a little bit about the scoring rubric and processes. So the scoring rubric that we've created outlines what aspects of the grant we would like to consider, as well as providing a space for comments. And the reason why we've set it up this way is that while the actual score is a numerical value that we can consider, when we actually get together and go over these grants, we're going to want to know and think about what kind of qualitative components, what other pieces beyond just the absolute score were important to you. And so by writing it down in the comment section, you'll be able to remember it. Similar to me, I read those grants a couple weeks ago, and honestly, at this point, I don't clearly remember it, but I had a part on the scientific review site where I could put comments down, where I can then be like, oh, Dr. Gettle failed to include anybody in the community on this grant, or he failed to address any of the priorities we identified during the consensus conference. And that way I know that my score of 3, what it actually means. So we'll get into that in a little bit more detail here. So there's 4 sections for the scoring rubric, and we're going to go through each of these in detail. Each of the sections is worth up to 10 points. So the first is the potential impact on the emergency care of persons living with dementia. The second is the ability of the applicant and their team to successfully engage in this work, to do what they say they want to do. The impact on health equity and how they've addressed it, and then the risk-benefit assessment. And the overall total is 40 points. So their final score they'll get will be out of 40 points. And so Jerry, who's used to the NIH scoring, we're not quite doing it the way the NIH does it. We've kind of simplified it out rather than forcing people to do all sorts of backs and forths of what's high and what's low. So the first question really is, what's the potential for impact on the emergency care of persons living with dementia? And in many ways, this is one of the biggest questions we have, right? If we want to know, Is there no potential to impact the emergency care of people living with dementia? Then they should get a 0. Or if there's an excellent potential and there's going to be a significant long-term impact, you may give it up to a 10. And scores in between. And so what we've tried to do, and the worksheet you'll get with this, is to give some kind of mileposts along the way. 1 to 3 is some potential to impact, 4 to 7 is a good impact, but they could do better. 8 to 10 is excellent. And for my recommendation is you just want to be consistent through all of your scoring, right? So if something is awesome, and you give it a 7 because, well, they could get a little bit better, just remember that that's your reference standard, how you are doing it. Don't worry about how everyone else scores. Every time I review grants, even I always stress about, am I scoring these right or not? This is your opinion, how you feel about the grant after you read it, and put down what you feel about it. There will be disagreements, and that's okay. And then there'll be a comment box for you to add comments into it.
When I was thinking about this impact issue, and also thinking about the fact that you have a separate scientific review group, and we're not a scientific review group, but the impact question does have some scientific context to it, right? So I mean, it's almost as if maybe we're asking to think about kind of 2 questions. One is, if this proposal is delivered exactly as it's described, if it's highly successful, then what would the impact be, right? But if the reason the scientific part overlaps with this, if in the project you just showed us, this Yale project, they're going to recruit all these diverse persons and diverse professionals, and if their whole recruitment is unfeasible, they're not even going to be able to conduct the study. So it's not going to have an impact. So my question is, can you help us think about how we think about impact, this group, without getting too far into the scientific component of impact because of it? Does that make sense?
It does, and we really kind of struggled and spent a lot of time thinking through this when we were trying to come up with a scoring rubric, and we actually based it off of a community group reviews that occur here that have been going on for a number of years. And ultimately, you can't completely separate the scientific and the
relevance.
The relevance. The difference between the scientific review and this review is you all know the relevance from being in the field all the time, whether you're a care partner, whether you're an advocate, whether you're living with the disease, whichever is true. Therefore, your evaluation of this is going to be informed by, in my terms, the reality of what goes on, much more than the scientific review, where there's some knowledge about this, and we've brought people on that have added knowledge, but it's not as community members that are in this field. And so when I say scientific review, or when we say scientific review, these are the people that are going to be obsessing on the inclusion criteria or the statistical analyses, which you'll think of too. If I say I'm just going to go stand on the street corner and ask for people with dementia to enroll in my study, you're going to look at that and be like, that's kind of dumb. But you may alternatively say, that's actually a great way to do it because I feel this way or that way about it. So yeah, I guess my bottom line is it is integrated to some level, but the fundamental expectation here is that you all are going to look at it with the lens of someone in this field on a day-to-day basis. Does that help?
Yes, yes. I think we actually are being asked to consider the relevance of the research that's being done.
You know, I think that might be a better term, Jerry. And I think, you know, Ange, we can take it to the rest of the group, but I think that might be, maybe it's the relevance of this, maybe a better term to use here. As I think about it. Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder what the others think about it. I mean, the word impact to me, I understand the impact, and at least if I were on the research side, I would want the impact to stay there, that word to stay there. But I think we should just know as a group that we're being asked to think about and critique the relevance of the project. I think that's what we're being asked.
How do the rest of you feel about that?
I think for me, it's from a practical standpoint. You know, from a realistic, practical standpoint, I am a person living with dementia. So, you know, I know how dementia impacts me on a day-to-day basis, of course, but for me, I'm going to look at this from that lens of it. How is it really going to help me or my care partner? How is it going to help us, all those of us in the community? So it's more of that practical relevance. That's going to be the key focus for me.
And I agree with what was just said. I personally will recuse myself in making a lot of these decisions just because I'm unable to do comparisons between one and another, but I will give my feedback as we go along, as I've already expressed that in the past.
So Michael, actually an important point is we don't want you to compare one grant to the next grant to the next grant. We just want you to read that grant and say, you know, is this an A? Is it a B? Is it a C? Is it a D? So you actually don't have to compare one against the other. Just look at it and say, is this relevant? Is it not relevant? And like on a, you know, this 0 to 10 scale, give it a number. Does that help?
That would help, but I mean, I've done this in the past for other projects. And if you're not able to compare one to the other and to give the right rating, I don't think you're being fair then. And I know myself, I'm unable to do that anymore. So, you know, I used to deal with vendors all the time, and I used to have to compare them from one vendor to the other one to make a decision which was the right vendor we would be choosing. And in this particular case, in order to do it right, at least my belief is that you do need to be able to compare.
Jerry?
Yeah, you raise a great point, Michael. But that's an issue that all of us have and all reviewers have in all circumstances, and that is how to be fair and just judge each application on its own merit versus the context that comes from knowing what other applications may say or have said. So that's not a unique challenge. And if we're going to have a review process, we all have that same challenge, Michael. That is to try to judge each project on its own merit, give it a score, and then we go to the next one, and then we go to the next one. You can't make your brain forget that you've seen other applications, but we all have to look at each application on its own merit. So I understand where you're coming from, but I think we're all faced with that, and someone has to review the projects.
Yeah, this is Morgan. I agree. I appreciate the point, Michael, and I just, from my own experience, I've you know, that I think what you described, Jerry, is something that we all have to manage as reviewers. I think that the language around relevance, it makes sense to me. I think, you know, I am not a researcher. So for example, when we're talking about this in terms of potential to impact, I don't think I want to try to get into those areas of, technical feasibility to impact. I think the relevance, as I understand my role in this kind of community review, that makes sense to me instead of trying to get too in the weeds of the technical or the feasibility of the technical.
What I'm hearing here is relevance. It's probably a better word. I will make sure you, Chris and Scott are good with that, given that they form the rest of kind of our executive committee. But I am very clearly convinced that that's a better word than impact. So thank you all for improving this. The second question is, and this gets a little bit to the applicant and their team. So what's their ability to successfully engage in this work? And Jerry, you had a question on what do we mean by engage in this work? And really what we're getting at is, can they do what they say they're going to do? Does their community group that they're working with, if they're working with one, does that group have what it takes? Does the applicant have what it takes? Does the institution have the resources and things that they need to do this? And range it from 0 where it's not clear or you don't think they can do it, to 10 where, yeah, it looks like they can and they're going to be set up for long-term success.
So Manish, one comment on this is, Morgan, is I was just saying about feasibility. I'm fine with this in terms of, do they have what they need to successfully engage through a particular lens of, community engagement. Some of the things we were talking about earlier, including what you had mentioned, Jerry, around the importance of seeing those layers of support so we can see how that network or those other community organizations, et cetera, are engaged in it. So I think just to clarify, I think we're going to be looking at, do they have what they need to be successful, but that's through a particular lens. Like for example, we're not looking at statistical powering or anything like that. That's through a particular lens of, do they have what they need to be successful? And that's more of a community and engagement lens, I take it.
Yes, 100%. Jerry?
And the reason I raised the question about this after I read the documents last night or early this morning was, that the way this is stated here doesn't make it clear to me whether the engagement had to extend into community organizations. So taking the project the example that we're using right now, and I know we just saw some snippets from it, but they mentioned this entity called LiveWell, and they mentioned this network, and so those. I mean, I like to think about the community stakeholders in a broad way, depending upon the specific aim. So if those are their community stakeholders, does this question ask whether they are successfully engaging in a feasible way with those stakeholders, in contrast to just, are the academic researchers fully committed to this work and this project, that they've embraced it and they're going to do it? The question doesn't make it clear to me that we're really going into the community network. So I just wanted us to be clear as the community reviewers here. I wanted us to be clear how, to the extent to which we're talking about community organizational engagement when we score this rubric, this question.
So the way we had thought about this when we were putting this together was, I guess, to be yes to both parts of your question. Can the whole group, whether it's the academic part individual, whether it's the live well and that network, or whomever else they're doing together as a whole, can they do what they say they're going to do And as part of that, as a subcomponent of that, requires the academic truly engaging that community partner. Because if they don't, then it's going to fall apart. So that's why I say my answer really is kind of a yes to both components of that.
Okay,
And maybe we'll tweak this language a little bit, and we can work on tweaking this language a little bit to make it more clear, as well as adding your component, Morgan, of reflecting the community lens.
thank you.
This is great. Thank you. So Jerry, you had another good comment on this in terms of the impact on health equity for people living with dementia and what we're getting at. And I think there's opportunity for us to improve the header here a little bit. The goal very much was, we don't want to be prescriptive, but we want to make sure that the applicants are considering all components of issues around inclusion of diverse populations within their studies, to considering issues around health equity for whatever they're doing. Does their intervention, if they're testing something or whatever they're doing, how does it affect different populations? Because one intervention could obviously affect a population different than another intervention. So that was what we were getting at here.
So actually, your comment just now, Manish, was made me think of something else. There's issues of attention to health equity, and then there's the impact on health equity. And impact is a strong word, which implies some level of success and some outcomes that are going to be achieved. But when I was listening to you just now, you caused me to think about health equity in relation to attention to issues relevant to health equity and how the project is being conducted. Were they attentive to that? So somebody else was about to say something.
Yeah, Deb was about to say something. Go ahead, Deb.
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind for me on this one is, in health equity is a pretty broad term, right? So the various components of health equity being addressed, because you can have health equity from a geographic perspective, from an ethnic standpoint, from a physical standpoint, deaf individuals that are deaf or blind or something along that line. So I know what I'm trying to get at here. I'm struggling a little bit on my words, but are we looking at it from all those broad definitions? Are we focusing more so along the lines of, let's say, like the ENACT Act, where it's more from a diversity standpoint of ethnic and underserved populations?
I think both of you have hit on exactly kind of what we were thinking about. And it is much, you're right, impact is a very strong word. It was more a component of, have they considered issues around diversity, inclusion, and health equity in their application?
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't want to be proscriptive, because obviously for $90,000, you're not going to be able to do something that's diverse from a geographic standpoint and do it across the country. And it's going to differ in the areas that you live in. If you live in, Texas, you're going to have to focus much more on Hispanic populations, given the higher population there, while in Montana, you may not. So at least I'm thinking on my feet here, maybe it's something like revising this to, successfully consider issues related to diversity and inclusion to promote health equity, or something like that within their application. Because we're not going to be able to prove a true outcome that for $90,000.
Yeah, that makes sense to me in the rewording. That would be consistent with what Deb said and I said too. It's really about paying attention to issues relevant to health equity for persons living with dementia. And then we would each consider how they showed that they were attentive to those issues, depending upon the population that they say they're targeting
Right.
in their application. So each application would still stand on its own merit.
Right. Excellent. This is fantastic. This is really helpful to us too.
And this is Morgan, just one follow-up on that. I'm not hearing anything that would apply a more narrow definition of health equity. It sounds like we can look at that fairly broadly. Just going back to what you were saying, Deb, we're working with a fairly broad and inclusive definition rather than a more narrow one, it sounds like.
Yes. Not that I'm speaking for Deb, because I couldn't.
Doug gave it a thumbs up and was nodding, which
I agree. Spot on.
any other final comments on that one? And then the final question is considering potential risks to vulnerable populations, which in this case would specifically be people living with dementia and their care partners, ranging from they didn't even think about it or account for it, up to, from your standpoint, they did a good job with this and will protect the participants in the study.
See, I think the word protection should be here. It could be potential risk and considerations of protections for vulnerable populations. I mean, the whole purpose of this ethics section is protection. It's really human protection. So it seems like the word protection should be in here somewhere.
Okay.
And that's less, to me, that's less abstract than the risk to them. Like concretely, what are you doing to protect the persons that you're going to touch with your research?
The rest of you feel comfortable with that? Does that sound like a?
Yes.
Awesome. We will
I do.
flip it to that. And interestingly enough, I just realized as you were talking, Jerry, that we actually talked the word protect in the rightmost box if you score well. And so we just need to expand it out a bit and hit on that key part. So
Yeah,
we will do that.
exactly.
We will do that. So we have thrown in a few tips, and I have tweaked the one that you commented on earlier, Jerry, to fix that one. Is when you're thinking about this grant, from your standpoint as a community member, how significant of an impact would this have? If they're successful and they can do what they're doing, is this going to make a difference or not? One thing we do want to make sure we consider is this going to set them up for future success, for future grant funding success? The NIH would like to see these pilot grants resulting in bigger applications to the NIH to do research and not just be a one and done type scenario. So is this going to seem reasonable to lead to future success? If you remember, and we had sent out the rankings that we had from the consensus conference, we had listed out research priorities. There were 4 or 5 within each of the 4 groups that folks you all voted on. And we want to make sure that the application addresses a research priority that was ranked highly by the stakeholders. So as you're thinking about this, make sure that you feel that way. Getting to the community engagement side of the question, how does the applicant engage with the community stakeholders? They truly do it in an open and thoughtful way, or do they go in with their answers and say, here's what we've got, this is what we need you to do for us type thing? one thing that would be interesting, and we can discuss this one a little bit, is, do they talk about how they want to promote the community involvement in the longer term, in the future projects that they may do? They may not do this, they may do that, but it would be interesting to see if this relationship they're developing with that community organization and the community stakeholders is going to become a core part of their overall research or not over the longer term. I think number 3 here actually hits on number 1 a little bit from way back, which is how is the study going to impact the overall community of people living with dementia and their care partners? We talked. Go ahead, Jerry. Sorry.
On that second bullet, are we asking whether the applicant is going to have an ongoing relationship with their community stakeholders beyond this 1 year? This project, this pilot project is coming to an end. So I don't think we're asking whether they're going to try to engage the community in the continuation of this project because it's over. It sounds like what you're asking is whether they propose to have an ongoing research relationship with the community beyond 1 year.
Exactly.
That distinction is a little fuzzy to me here.
No, I think you've highlighted the crux of what we're getting at, which is this project going to result in a longer term relationship for future research? And maybe we'll rephrase it that way.
Sure. Sure.
Because the goal is that, if I'm working with organization X, that this becomes a long-term collaboration that we keep building on and doing. And so that's really how we'll rephrase it to match that.
Okay.
So we talked about the risk benefit. We will change this to really focus on the protection side rather than the risk side. So we will skip these tips for right now. All right, any questions before I jump into some practical components? Okay. So what's going to happen going forward is that we will send you the grants. If you want them in paper, we're happy to print them out and ship them to you. If you'd like them electronically, we can just send you the PDFs, but we will send you the grants as well as a form for you to score the grants, the form for you to use to score the grants. What we will ask for all of you to do is to submit the scores and the comments to us before we all get together to review them virtually. Obviously, you keep a copy of it, but we'll get the stuff from all of you. Partially because I, as a person kind of coordinating the group, I just want to read through what all of your comments are and your thoughts are, just so I can we can get a sense of how the grants are scoring.
Manish, would it be possible to, with the first grant that comes to us, to actually have just that 1-page summary of each of the key points under the consensus conference, the priorities?
Yes. Yes, we will. We have that. We will give that 1-page summary of the 4 areas and the questions that came with them. Absolutely.
Yeah, the priority one's great. Thank you.
Would it also be able to send those in a Word type document rather than a PDF? And the reason for that is I like to, as I read things, and if I don't understand things, I like to add them to the document. So I might need to put something back to somebody as a question with more clarification.
You mean the grant is a Word type document or the evaluation form is a Word type document?
The grant itself that the people are asking, because I like to be able to put notes to it, and you can't do that with a PDF.
Unfortunately, we only have them as a PDF because they do get a little long. That's how they submitted them to us.
Well, I guess
A lot
I
of
could copy, I guess, from the PDF, and just put it aside.
Deb, you were saying something?
A lot of PDF readers, or when you open a PDF, if you readers where you can actually click a comment button and actually add a comment, like a bubble to it,
That's what I was going to
that
mention.
might be helpful, because that way you don't impact the integrity of the document itself, but you still have the ability to add that again, the comments or your thoughts.
Do you know how to do that, Michael? Put a comment in a PDF?
I don't think so, but we'll I guess cross that road as if I need to do that.
Well, we can show it to you, either Ange or Jeff. One of them can show you how to do that. It's in the PDF readers in Adobe's reader.
Okay.
So, other comments? Does anybody want these printed out and shipped to them, or are all of you okay with this just being sent as a attachment? Deb?
I
We're
would
happy
like
to.
it printed out. I would
Absolutely.
definitely like it printed.
Just
Actually,
electronic,
And
just electronic.
I have a new,
fine with me.
What were you saying, Deb?
both electronic and print would be great, but I have to give you a new address too.
Okay.
We're
Ange,
finally back in Missouri.
Ange will follow up with you on that one. Beverly or Teresa, would you guys print electronic?
My preference is electronic, but my issue is, I think I've mentioned to this group before that I have Stargardt's, which is the dry version of macular degeneration. So reading is difficult for me. So what I need to be able to do is use my read aloud feature. And sometimes the version of my Adobe Reader won't read because there's a protection or something on it. So basically, I was just going to send you an email after saying that depending on what I receive, if I'm able to get it so that I can either copy it into a document or do a read aloud, I may or not be able to participate.
Okay. You know, I think see how it goes, and we can talk about that, because I really would love for you to hate for you to not be able to participate. And
Right.
so let's maybe talk about that depending on how it plays out. Okay.
Okay, that was what I was going to do once I receive it. And if I'm not able to, then I would let you know. But I'd like to participate if I can.
Yeah, if it doesn't work, I have an idea how we can maybe solve it a bit.
Okay, great.
Okay. Awesome. So then at the meeting, which it'll be a Zoom just like this, what we're going to do, and this will probably be either Eula or me, will summarize the grant a little bit, just so that we can all make sure we're at the same point. And we'll facilitate a discussion on each of these 4 questions that we've had, that we've talked about here. And we'll take notes on that. At the very end of this discussion, everyone will give the overall grant just a final summary score of 0 to 10. What would you rate it? And that's the score that we're going to use, the average of all of you, that we'll use for the score that comes out of this group. So it'll go basically, we summarize the grant, we'll talk about, or you all really will talk about your thoughts on each of the 4 questions, and then we'll ask you to provide a summary score. Jerry, you're muted.
You might have mentioned this before, but how long is the research section? How many pages are that for these grants? What was it?
It's 6 pages.
Okay, great. That's a lot better than 25.
Oh yeah, no. No, 6 pages.
Thank you.
And then actually, Jeff, can you, I'm going to stop sharing. Jeff, can you stop recording?